The cold was a discipline. Cole understood it, respected its sterile purity. It was an honest enemy, unlike the ghosts that haunted the warmth of memory. Here, in the high, thin air of the Rockies, winter was a siege engine that laid waste to everything but the essential. His cabin, perched on a granite shoulder of the mountain, was a fortress against the past. Its walls were scrubbed pine, its floors swept clean, its silence as sharp and absolute as a held breath before the breach. He moved through the space with the economy of a man long accustomed to confined quarters and lethal purpose. Every action was a drill, every object in its designated place. Coffee mug, square to the counter's edge, boots aligned with the hearth, the rifle, cleaned and oiled, resting on its pegs above the mantel, was not for hunting, but for the same reason a monk kept a skull on his desk, a reminder of finality. He had been a Navy SEAL for 2 decades. His body was a map of scars and tolerances, his mind a steel trap of tactics and procedures. But the armor he had worn for so long had failed to protect him from the one attack he never saw coming, a patch of black ice on a winding country road. The loss of his wife, Sarah, had been a quiet, internal detonation that had leveled everything. 6 months after her funeral, his military working dog, Max, a magnificent Belgian Malinois who had twice saved his life in the dust of Kandahar, had fallen to a sniper's bullet. The 2 pillars of his world had crumbled, leaving him adrift in a silence that was louder than any firefight. So he had come here, to this mountain, to serve out his sentence in a prison of his own making. His only link to the world he had abandoned was his sister Chloe. Her voice on the phone was an intrusion, a splash of unwanted color in his monochrome existence. "Cole, you can't just hibernate forever," she had said, her tone a careful blend of love and exasperation. "The town shelter is desperate for help. They need to winterproof the outdoor kennels before this blizzard hits. Just a few hours, please, for me." He had resisted offering a litany of clipped, one-word objections. But Chloe had his flank. She knew his ingrained sense of duty was the one weak point in his defenses. A mission, no matter how small, a task to be completed. He had finally agreed with a sigh that felt like grinding rust. The Ponderosa Pine Animal Shelter was a low, cinder-block building that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. It was a place of cages and concrete, a last stop for the hopeful and the forgotten. Cole ignored the pleading eyes in the main adoption area, his focus locked on the mission. He was there to work, to swing a hammer and haul lumber, not to feel. He found the director, a harried woman named Mrs. Gable, who pointed him toward a stack of insulation panels and a row of exposed kennels at the far end of the property. The wind was already beginning to bite, a precursor to the storm front rolling over the peaks. He worked with methodical efficiency, his movements precise, his mind blessedly blank. The rhythmic impact of the hammer was a kind of meditation. But as the afternoon wore on, a sound pricked at the edges of his concentration. It was not the yapping of the smaller dogs or the deep-throated barks of the hounds. It was a low, resonant growl, more a warning than a threat. He followed the sound to the last kennel, set apart from the others. A handwritten sign, taped to the chain link, read, "COTAON, do not approach." Inside, a German shepherd lay on the cold concrete, a queen in exile. She was magnificent, even in her emaciated state. Her coat was the color of sable and old gold, thick but matted. Her head was noble, her ears erect and alert. Tucked behind her, nearly invisible, were 2 small bundles of fur puppies. It was she who had been growling, a silent, rumbling promise of violence to anyone who came too close to her young. But it was her eyes that stopped him. He had seen those eyes before. He had seen them in the amber gaze of Max, his fallen partner. They were not eyes of mindless aggression. They were eyes of profound, weary vigilance. A soldier standing the last watch over the last thing they had left to defend. Mrs. Gable appeared at his elbow, her arms crossed against the cold. "That's Athena," she said, her voice tired. Found her and the pups living under a collapsed porch, half starved. She won't let anyone within 10 feet of them. We can't even get in to clean the run properly. She shook her head. He's unadoptable, beautiful dog, but she's broken. We'll have to separate them tomorrow. Give the pups a chance at least. The words hit Cole with the force of a physical blow. Separate them. A violation of the most fundamental law he knew. You never leave your unit behind. He looked at Athena, at the rigid line of her back, the unwavering focus of her gaze. She was not broken. She was holding the line. For the first time in 2 years, a feeling other than the dull ache of grief stirred in his chest. It was a cold, sharp anger, a sense of injustice. He looked from the dog to the darkening sky, where the first heavy flakes of snow were beginning to fall. The mission had just changed. The blizzard arrived, not with a roar, but with a suffocating whisper. The world beyond the shelter's windows dissolved into a churning vortex of white. The wind howled, rattling the old building's metal roof. Then, with a flicker and a groan, the lights went out, plunging the shelter into a dim, emergency-lit twilight. The temperature inside began to drop immediately. A new kind of panic, colder and more immediate than the daily desperation, rippled through the kennels. A young woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor was moving through the aisles, speaking in a soothing voice to the anxious animals. She introduced herself as Dr. Anya Sharma, the town's only veterinarian who volunteered during crises. The main generator is shut, she told Cole, her breath fogging in the frigid air. And the heating system for the isolation wing is completely dead. That mother and her pups, they won't last the night in this. Mrs. Gable was frantic, trying to coordinate a move to the town's high school gymnasium. We have to sedate her, she said, gesturing toward Athena's kennel. It's the only way to move her, but it's risky for the pups, and for her in this condition. Cole watched Athena. She was on her feet now, a low growl, a constant vibration in her chest, her body a shield in front of her shivering puppies. Sedation, separation. The words were unacceptable, an order he refused to follow. He walked to the kennel, ignoring Mrs. Gable's sharp intake of breath. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, moving with the slow, deliberate grace that had allowed him to disarm bombs and approach weary insurgents. He did not look directly into her eyes, a sign of challenge. Instead, he looked at the ground just in front of her, and he spoke. His voice was low, a quiet baritone, the same tone he had used with Max in the belly of a Black Hawk, the hum of the rotors, a backdrop to their silent communion. Easy, girl, he murmured. I see you. You've done good. Stand down. I've got the watch now. He said nothing else. He simply remained there, a statue of quiet confidence in the freezing chaos. Athena's growl faltered, dropping in pitch until it was just a tremor. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. Her nose twitched, sampling his scent. He smelled of pine, cold air, and something else, the faint, metallic tang of loss she seemed to recognize. He slowly extended a hand, palm down. She watched it for a long moment, her intelligent eyes weighing a lifetime of mistrust against this one moment of stillness. Then, she stretched her neck and touched his fingers with the tip of her cold, wet nose. It was a pact, a transfer of command. Anya watched her expression, a mixture of awe and disbelief. Cole rose slowly. I'm taking them, he said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. My cabin has a generator and a wood stove. They'll be safe there. Mrs. Gable started to protest, a flurry of regulations and liabilities on her lips. But Anya cut her off. It's their only chance, she said, her gaze locked on Cole. I'll take responsibility. We'll sort the paperwork after the storm. Anya helped him find a small crate for the puppies, her movements efficient, gentle. Cole opened the kennel gate. Athena did not bolt. She looked at him, then at her pups, and with a quiet dignity, she walked at his side as he carried the crate to his truck, a loyal soldier following her new commander into the heart of the storm. The drive back to the cabin was a battle. The truck's headlights barely pierced the swirling whiteout, and the wind shoved at the vehicle like an angry giant. Pierced. Inside the cab, the only sounds were the rhythmic slap of the wipers, the whine of the engine, and the soft whimpers of the puppies in their crate on the passenger seat. Athena lay on the floor at his feet, her body pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence in the chaos. Cole felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. He was on a mission again. The objective was clear: survival. The ghosts receded, pushed back by the immediacy of the task. He made it to the cabin, the tires finding purchase on the familiar gravel of his drive. Inside, the air was frigid. His first action was to start the generator, bringing the cabin to life with a low hum and a soft yellow glow from the lamps. Next, he built a fire in the stone hearth, his movements practiced and swift. The kindling caught, and flames began to lick at the seasoned logs, casting dancing shadows on the pine walls. The fortress of solitude was breached, not by an enemy, but by 3 refugees. He cleared a space near the fire, laying down an old canvas tarp and several thick wool blankets to create a makeshift whelping box. He gently lifted the puppies out of their crate. One, a bold little male with oversized paws and a perpetually surprised expression, immediately stumbled out of the nest and began a clumsy, determined assault on the leg of a nearby chair. Cole watched him, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He decided to call him Ruckus. The other pup, a female, smaller and darker, huddled in the corner of the box, her eyes wide and watchful. She seemed to carry the weight of the world in her small frame. He named her Ghost. Athena drank deeply from the bowl of fresh water he set down, then began to meticulously clean her pups, her rough tongue a source of comfort and warmth. She ignored the food. He offered her attention, fixed solely on her duty. Cole understood. A soldier on watch doesn't eat. He sat on the floor, a few feet away, leaning against a chair, content to stand his own watch. The sterile odor of his home was gone. The air now held the scent of wet fur, wood smoke, and life. The profound silence he had cultivated for 2 years was filled with the soft sounds of a mother tending her young. It was a chaos he welcomed. It pushed the silence back. Sometime before dawn, he must have drifted off. He awoke with a start, not to an alarm, but to a gentle pressure on his hand. Athena had moved from her nest and laid her great head on his knee. Her amber eyes were fixed on his, and in their depths he saw not a challenge, but a question, and gratitude. He slowly raised his hand and stroked her head, his fingers sinking into the thick fur behind her ears. "You're safe now," he whispered, and he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or to himself. The internal winter that had frozen his heart for so long felt a subtle shift. The first crack in the ice. The storm raged for 2 full days. Cole and his new charges were marooned in their ark of warmth and light. He developed a new routine: feed the fire, check the generator, boil water, offer food to Athena, which she finally began to accept, eating from his outstretched hand. He would clean the puppies with a warm, damp cloth, his large calloused hands surprisingly gentle. Ruckus would chew on his fingers with needle-sharp teeth, his tail a furious metronome of joy. Ghost would simply watch, her gaze unnervingly perceptive, as if she could see the hairline fractures in his soul. On the 3rd morning, the world was reborn in blinding white and brilliant blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of profound peace and impossible beauty. It also left a clear path for visitors. He was outside, clearing a path to the woodpile, when he saw the small, bundled figure trudging up his driveway. It was Eleanor Vance, his closest neighbor, a retired army nurse, who lived a half-mile down the mountain. She was a widow, a woman whose quiet strength was etched into the lines around her kind eyes. She carried a covered pot that steamed in the cold air. "Saw the smoke from your chimney and figured you'd weathered it," she said, her voice raspy from the cold. Brought you some stew. Her eyes flickered past him, through the open cabin door, and saw Athena rise to her feet by the hearth. Eleanor didn't seem surprised. She simply nodded, a slow, knowing gesture. Looks like you had company for the storm. He invited her in, and she moved with a quiet familiarity, placing the stew on the counter. She had lost her only son in Afghanistan, a fact they had never discussed. But that hung between them, a shared, unspoken grief. She looked at the makeshift nursery by the fire, at the two puppies tumbling over each other. Sometimes the mission finds you, Sergeant, she said softly, using a title he hadn't heard in years. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of old, clean towels. I thought you might need these. In that simple gesture, she offered not just practical help, but an alliance. She saw his wound, and she saw the medicine he had inadvertently found for it. For the first time, Cole felt a part of something, a thread in the fabric of this small mountain community. He was no longer just a ghost haunting the high slopes. The thaw outside was mirrored by the thaw within. The rigid discipline of his grief began to soften around the edges. He found himself talking to the dogs, his voice filling the once silent cabin. He told Athena about Max, about their bond forged in the crucible of combat. He told Ghost, the watchful soul, about Sarah, about her laughter that could make wildflowers bloom in the desert. He told Ruckus, the foolish hero, funny stories from basic training, and found himself chuckling as the puppy chased his own tail, until he grew dizzy and fell over. He was excavating his own heart, and the dogs were his patient, non-judgmental audience. But the peace was as fragile as a pane of ice. A few days after the storm, a county vehicle crunched up his driveway. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, his face set in an expression of bureaucratic certainty. It was Mr. Davies, the shelter director. He was not unkind, but he was a man who lived by the book, and the book had no chapter for what Cole had done. Mr. Ryland, Davies began, declining Cole's offer to come inside. I'm glad to see the animals are safe. Dr. Sharma explained the situation. However, my hands are tied. They are property of the county. They need to be returned to the shelter for official evaluation and processing. He spoke of protocols and procedures, of liability and regulations. The words were a sterile assault on the living, breathing sanctuary Cole had built. Athena had come to stand beside Cole, a low rumble starting in her chest. He placed a calming hand on her back. They're not county property, Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. They're my responsibility. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. It was a feeling he thought had died with Sarah and Max. Davy sighed, a man caught between his rulebook and the reality standing before him. I understand your attachment, but the law is the law. Athena has been designated as potentially aggressive. She needs to be assessed by a behaviorist. The puppies will be put on the adoption list. Separately, of course. It gives them a better chance. The word separately struck Cole like a physical blow. He looked down at Ruckus, who was currently trying to untie Davy's shoelace, and at Ghost, who was peeking out from behind Athena's leg. He looked at the noble mother, who had fought starvation and fear to keep her family together. The idea was a desecration. No, he said, the single word as solid and unmoving as the mountain at his back. They are a unit. They stay together. Here, for the first time, he gave voice to the truth that had taken root in his heart. This is their family. Mr. Davies' face hardened. He was not a villain, merely an agent of a system that had no room for sentiment. You have 48 hours to return them voluntarily, he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. After that, I will have to come back with a sheriff's deputy and a court order. I don't want to do that, Mr. Ryland, but I will. He got back in his truck and drove away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and a ticking clock hanging in the clean mountain air. The fortress was once again under siege, this time not by winter, but by the cold, impartial hand of the law. The ultimatum settled over the cabin like a shroud. The warmth and nascent joy of the past few days were chilled by the impending threat. Cole felt the old walls closing in, the familiar impulse to retreat, to shut down. But when he looked at the three dogs, at the unconditional trust in Athena's eyes, he knew that retreat was not an option. He had a new unit to protect. The stress, however, was a palpable thing, and animals were barometers of emotion. Athena sensed his tension. She became restless, pacing the length of the cabin, her ears twitching at every sound from the forest outside. That night the wind picked up again, a mournful sound that scraped at the eaves of the cabin. A heavy branch, burdened by ice from the blizzard, finally gave way and crashed onto the roof with a sound like an explosion. The noise was a trigger. For Cole, it was the percussive crack of an IED. For Athena, it was the terrifying echo of a world that had only ever offered her cruelty. In a blind panic, she bolted. She shot through the small dog door he had installed, a dark blur disappearing into the moonless night. The puppies, startled by her sudden flight and the echoing crash, began to whine, a heartbreaking chorus of abandonment. Cole's training took over, smothering his own flash of panic. Triage, assess act. The puppies were his immediate priority. He couldn't leave them. He grabbed his heaviest winter coat, the one lined with shearling, and gently bundled the two whimpering pups inside, zipping it up so only their small heads poked out. Ghost trembled against his chest, while Ruckus, for the foolish hero, tried to lick his chin. He grabbed the powerful tactical flashlight and his sidearm not for any human threat, but for the four-legged predators that roamed these woods. His knee, an old injury from a hard parachute landing, screamed in protest as he stepped out into the biting cold. The night was black and frigid. The beam of his flashlight cut a sharp, lonely cone through the darkness, illuminating a world of snow and shadow. He found Athena's tracks easily in the fresh powder, leading away from the cabin and into the dense, treacherous woods. He began to track her, his every sense on high alert. He called her name, his voice swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. Athena! Come on, girl, stand down. The cold was a physical enemy now, seeping through his clothes, stiffening his joints. The pain in his knee became a hot, stabbing agony with every step. He pushed it down, compartmentalizing it the way he had been trained to do. Pain was just data. The mission was everything. He followed the tracks for what felt like miles, up a steep, wooded ridge. The air grew thinner, colder. He could feel the puppies shivering against his body. Their small lives depended on him. He finally heard it, a frantic, desperate barking, punctuated by the high-pitched yips and snarls of coyotes. He broke into a clumsy run, ignoring the fire in his knee. He crested the ridge and saw the scene illuminated in his flashlight beam. Athena was backed against a rock outcropping, her teeth bared, her fur on end. A small pack of coyotes, lean and hungry, were circling her, darting in and out, testing her defenses. She was holding them off, a lone soldier against a superior force. But she was tiring, and her frantic barks were a call for reinforcements she did not have. A primal rage, cold and pure, surged through Cole. He didn't hesitate. He drew his pistol and fired a single shot into the air. The deafening report echoed through the silent mountains. The coyotes, startled and unnerved by the sound and the sudden appearance of a larger threat, scattered into the darkness. Athena's barking subsided into ragged, exhausted panting. He limped toward her, his flashlight beam finding her eyes. She saw him, saw the puppies peeking from his coat, and the last of her fear-driven aggression collapsed. She moved toward him, her body low to the ground, and pressed her head against his leg, licking his hand in a gesture of absolute surrender and gratitude. She had been rescued, and she knew it. The journey back was a grueling ordeal. Cole was limping badly, the cold having sunk deep into his bones. He held the puppies with one arm and kept the other on Athena, guiding her through the darkness. They were halfway down the ridge when a pair of headlights sliced through the trees below. A vehicle was making its way up his private road. His heart sank. It was Davies, with the deputy. They hadn't even waited for the deadline to expire. The truck pulled up just as Cole and his weary troop emerged from the tree line. Mr. Davies and a young sheriff's deputy stepped out, their faces grim. With them was Anya, her expression fraught with worry. She had clearly convinced them to come check on him before simply enforcing the order. But they stopped short when they saw the state of him. They saw the exhaustion etched on his face, the profound limp, the shivering puppies tucked into his jacket. They saw the magnificent German shepherd walking at his side, not as a prisoner, but as a partner, her body occasionally brushing against his leg as if to offer support. They saw a man who had just walked through fire, or in this case, ice for these animals. The scene was more powerful than any regulation in Davy's book. The lawman had come to enforce a rule, but he was witnessing the embodiment of a higher law, one of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. Anya rushed forward, taking the puppies from him, so he could lean more heavily on his good leg. Davy simply stood there, his mouth slightly agape, the court order in his hand looking flimsy and irrelevant. The second ordeal was over. Mercy had won. Back in the warm, bright sanctuary of the cabin, a new kind of order was established. Anya, with the practiced efficiency of a skilled vet, examined Athena for injuries and checked on the puppies, pronouncing them cold but unharmed. She then turned her attention to Cole, firmly ordering him onto a chair so she could inspect his swollen knee. Her touch was gentle but professional, and as she wrapped the joint, her concern was a quiet warmth that thawed something more than just his frozen muscles. The deputy, a young man with kind eyes, helped to bring in more firewood. Mr. Chaz, Davies, looking deeply uncomfortable in the face of such raw, unbureaucratic reality, stood by the door holding his useless paperwork. The evaluation is complete, Cole said, his voice raspy with exhaustion, looking directly at Davies. She's a protector. She's loyal. She's family. Davies looked from Cole to the dog, who was now lying by the hearth, her head resting on her paws, her gaze fixed on the man who had walked into the darkness for her. He looked at the puppies, now safely back in their nest, and at the quiet competence of the veterinarian tending to their rescuer. He folded the court order and tucked it into his pocket. I think I can find a way to fast-track the adoption paperwork, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. For all three of them. To you. It was a complete surrender. A victory for the heart over the rulebook. The following week saw a transformation. The cabin, once a monument to grief and isolation, became a home. It was no longer silent or sterile. It was filled with the skittering claws of puppies on wood floors, the soft thud of Athena's tail against the sofa, the quiet commands and sudden bursts of laughter from Cole. He taught them discipline, but it was a discipline born of love, not necessity. Ruckus learned to sit, but only after attempting to pounce on the treat from 3 feet away and tumbling head over paws. Ghost learned to heel with a quiet, focused intensity that reminded Cole so much of Max it made his heart ache in a way that was both sad and sweet. His sister Chloe came to visit one Saturday, her car filled with an absurd number of dog toys and treats. She stopped in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. Cole was on the floor wrestling with Ruckus, a genuine, unforced smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Athena was asleep on the old armchair that had once been Sarah's, a place no one had been allowed to touch. Chloe saw not just a man with dogs, but a man who had been led back into the light. "It's good to have you back, big brother," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Spring arrived on the mountain, melting the snow and painting the meadows with wildflowers. Life returned, vibrant and insistent. Cole's found family grew. Anya became a regular visitor, her initial professional concern blossoming into a warm friendship that held the quiet promise of something more. Eleanor would often join them on the porch in the evenings, sharing stories and watching the dogs play in the sprawling yard. Cole had fenced in. One evening, as the setting sun bathed the peaks in shades of rose and gold, Cole sat on the porch steps, an old harmonica in his hand. It had been Sarah's favorite. He hadn't touched it since she died, the memories it held too sharp, too painful. But now, he brought it to his lips. He played a simple, hesitant melody, a folk song she had loved. It wasn't a lament, it was a tune of quiet contentment, of peace earned through trial. Anya sat beside him, her shoulder gently brushing his. Eleanor smiled from her rocking chair. Athena came and rested her head on his good knee. Ghost lay at his feet, ever watchful. And Ruckus, the foolish hero, chased a firefly across the lawn, a clumsy, joyful dance of pure, unadulterated life. Cole looked out at his small, unconventional family, at the home he had built, not from wood and stone, but from the fragments of a broken heart. He had gone to the shelter to fix a fence, a simple physical task. He had ended up rebuilding his own soul. The soldier, haunted by the ghosts of those he could not save, had finally found a new mission. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a guardian, a protector of a small, fierce, and beautiful peace. The rescuer had, at long last, been rescued.